Tonight, open your phone. Scroll for 30 seconds. You just did something no creature in the history of life on Earth has ever done. And your body handled it perfectly. Not because you evolved for it, because you didn't have to. And that distinction might be the most unsettling thing about being human right now. Every species on this planet is in a constant negotiation with its environment. The ones that fit survive. The ones that don't disappear. It's been working that way for 4 billion years. And for most of human history, we were part of that system. Dying young, getting eaten, starving, freezing, being killed by infections that today we fix with a 3-day prescription. Natural selection was running its program on us the same way it ran on everything else. But somewhere along the way, we stepped off the conveyor belt. The question is when? And the answer is more complicated than most people realize. Let's start with what evolution actually needs to work. 3 things. Variation. Individuals in a population need to be different from each other. Heritability. Those differences need to be passed down. And selection pressure. Something in the environment has to make some variations survive better than others. Remove any one of those 3 and evolution slows down. Remove all 3 and it basically stops. For most of human history, all 3 were running at full force. You were either strong enough, smart enough, or lucky enough to survive long enough to have children. Or you weren't. Simple, brutal, effective. Then we started cheating. About 10,000 years ago, something shifted. Humans figured out agriculture. Instead of following food, we made food follow us. We stopped being nomadic. We built permanent settlements. We stored grain. We domesticated animals. And for the first time in our species' history, survival stopped being purely about individual fitness. It started being about cooperation. A farmer with bad eyesight could survive in a village in a way they never could on the open savanna. A person with a weak immune system could make it through a winter with enough stored food and people around to help. The environment stopped filtering us as hard. And when the environment stops filtering, natural selection loses its grip. But here's the thing that most people miss. That wasn't the end of human evolution. It was the beginning of a different kind. Because agriculture didn't just change how we lived. It changed our biology in ways we can still read in our DNA today. About 7,500 years ago, a mutation appeared in European populations. It allowed adults to digest lactose, the sugar found in milk. Before this mutation, every human on the planet lost the ability to process lactose after childhood, just like every other mammal. You drink milk as a baby because your mother produces it. You grow up, the enzyme shuts off, and that's that. But then humans domesticated cattle. Suddenly, there was an enormous caloric resource available, milk, and most people couldn't use it. The individuals who happened to carry the lactose mutation had access to thousands of extra calories that nobody else could touch. In a world where starvation was always one bad harvest away, that was a massive survival advantage. Within a few thousand years, the mutation spread through European and some African populations like a wave. Today, roughly 35% of the global population can digest milk into adulthood. The other 65% still can't. That split at your dinner table right now is a direct record of evolution happening in real time just a few thousand years ago. The same thing happened with malaria resistance. In regions where malaria was endemic, a mutation called the sickle cell trait spread through populations because it offered partial protection against the parasite. The mutation has a cost. Inheriting 2 copies causes sickle cell disease, which is painful and life-shortening. But 1 copy gives you protection against malaria without the disease. In a region where malaria kills children before they can reproduce, 1 copy beats 0 copies. The math is brutal. Evolution doesn't care about suffering. It only counts survivors. So evolution didn't stop. It just changed its targets. But here's where it gets genuinely complicated. In the last 200 years, something happened that has no precedent in the entire history of life on this planet. We developed modern medicine. Before 1800, roughly half of all children born did not survive to adulthood. Think about that. Every family expected to bury children. It was not tragedy in the modern sense. It was just the reality of being alive. Infections, parasites, malnutrition, injury. The list of things that could kill a child before they reproduced was almost endless. Natural selection was running hard on those deaths. The children who survived were, on average, slightly more resistant to the diseases and conditions that killed the others. Generation by generation, slowly, the population was being shaped. Then came vaccines, antibiotics, surgical techniques, clean water infrastructure, insulin for diabetics, blood transfusions, incubators for premature infants. Each one of these technologies removed a selection pressure that had been running on humans for thousands of years. A person born today with type 1 diabetes can live a full, long, reproductive life with insulin. Before 1921, when insulin was discovered, type 1 diabetes was a death sentence, usually within months of diagnosis. That selection pressure is now gone. The genetic variants associated with type 1 diabetes are no longer being filtered out of the population at the rate they once were. This isn't a criticism. Letting people live is obviously the right thing to do, but it does mean that the machinery of natural selection has been fundamentally disrupted in a way that has never happened before to any species in any ecosystem. So are we actually stopping our own evolution? The honest answer is not exactly, but we are changing what it selects for. A 2012 study tracked a population in Quebec from the 1800s through the 1900s, following real families across generations. The researchers found measurable shifts in reproductive success linked to specific traits. Women who had their first child slightly earlier left more descendants, on average, than women who had children later. That's selection. That's evolution. It's just operating on a different variable than survival. Because in a world where almost everyone survives to adulthood, survival stops being the filter. Reproduction becomes the filter. What matters now, in evolutionary terms, is not whether you live. It's whether you have children, how many, and how early. And the forces that influence those outcomes, culture, economics, access to education, personal choice, are completely different from the forces that shaped our ancestors. This is where it gets philosophically uncomfortable, because what we're doing right now, as a civilization, is making conscious choices about which pressures to remove. We treat disease. We support people with disabilities. We extend lifespans. And every one of those choices shapes the future of the species in ways that natural selection never could have predicted. We are the first species in the history of life on Earth that has begun to consciously direct its own evolution. And we're doing it mostly by accident. The gene editing technology, CRISPR, first used in humans in clinical trials in 2019, allows scientists to go into the genome and change specific sequences. We can correct the mutation that causes sickle cell disease. We are getting close to correcting the one that cause certain cancers. At some point, maybe decades away, maybe sooner, we will have the ability to make heritable changes to the human genome, changes that get passed down, changes that would spread through the population exactly the way the lactose mutation did, but on a timeline of years instead of thousands of years. At that point, the question of whether humans are still evolving becomes almost beside the point, because evolution, by definition, is change in heritable traits over generations driven by selection, and we are about to be the ones choosing the selection. For 4 billion years, no species has ever had that ability. Not the dinosaurs, not the sharks that have barely changed in 400 million years, not the crows that can solve puzzles and recognize human faces. None of them ever got to look at their own genome and decide what came next. We're the first, and we have no idea what we're doing. The most honest thing science can say right now is that human evolution has not stopped. It has shifted from being driven by the environment to being driven by us, by our medicine, our technology, our culture, and soon, our deliberate choices at the level of DNA. Every other species on this planet is still at the mercy of a process it cannot see and cannot control. We climbed out of that process and handed ourselves the controls. Whether that's the most brilliant thing any species has ever done or the most dangerous might be the most important question of the next 100 years. And we're already living in the answer.